In a galaxy where most folks prized shiny new tech like politicians prized plausible deniability, Rixal Baines found solace in rust and ruin. The largest junkyard in the known universe, Naxos Orbital Salvage Station, was her playground, a place where dreams went to die, only to be reborn in the hands of those with a knack for screws and a stubborn refusal to let go of the past. Rixal often referred to herself as a tech archaeologist, mostly because junk rat didn't fit well on business cards, and also because it made her sound less like a scavenger and more like someone who might know what the hell she was doing. Her calm crackled to life with all the grace of a cat coughing up a hairball. Rix, you find anything worth its weight in scrap yet, or are you just polishing the doorknobs of history again? Rixal sighed, pushing oily hair from her eyes. If I wanted to polish knobs, Gilly, I'd have joined the corp. But hey, I got a lead on something interesting. Might even call it a peculiar anomaly. That got Gilly's attention, his voice jumping in pitch like a teenager caught with his hand in the cookie jar, or perhaps more accurately, the petty cache. Anomaly, you know that word gets the eggheads all tingly. Where and what? Grid Sector Z9. Looks like someone tried to crossbreed a toaster with an FTL drive and probably died trying. Rixal grinned, knowing full well that meant Gilly's curiosity meter just redlined. Sweet. You think it's worth a look? Hell if I know. I'm just the gal who gets her hands dirty. But something tells me this toaster ain't just for bread. Over in the Zinc Coalition's command center, several light years away, an entirely different conversation was sparking up. Well, if you could call it a conversation when one party was more interested in monologuing. High Commander Tikal was practicing his favorite pastime, fretting about those unpredictable humans. Humans have an affinity for chaos, Tikal mused aloud, pacing in front of the holographic display that painted the galaxy in hues of light and warning symbols. They're like those ancient Earth creatures, the ones that kept multiplying in water and ruining ecosystems. His subordinate, Lieutenant Zerith, nodded with the kind of enthusiasm only underlings in the line of fire could muster. Rabbits, sir. Earth rabbits? Yes, rabbits. Tikal snapped his fingers, momentarily pleased with this connection between humans and invasive species. They breed chaos, and now they're poking around in things best left undisturbed. Back on Naxos, Rixal was elbow-deep in the guts of the anomaly, her fingers working with the precision of a surgeon who'd decided a steady hand was overrated. If this contraption had thoughts, they were probably screaming for mercy. This doesn't look right, she murmured to herself, pulling out a component that looked suspiciously like a quantum flux capacitor, if such a thing existed outside of cheesy holo novels. Rix, you still with me? Gilly's voice buzzed again, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this floating heap of dreams deferred. Yeah, I'm here. And so is something that shouldn't be. She held up the component, eyeing it with a mix of awe and suspicion. If this thing's doing what I think it's doing, it could rewrite everything we know about FTL travel. Rewrite, like how a toddler rewrites a classic with crayon. Rixal grinned despite herself. Exactly. But with more explosions, probably. By now, the Zinc Coalition was in a flutter of activity, like a hornet's nest poked one too many times. Tikal's scowl deepened, a feat that should have been physically impossible given the depth of his usual frown. We must monitor them more closely, Tikal declared, every word drenched in the kind of melodrama usually reserved for soap operas and political speeches. If the humans discover a new form of physics, who knows what chaos they'll unleash? Yes, sir, Zerith replied, though privately he wondered if they weren't already swimming in chaos. Pour more in and you might just drown. It was anyone's guess if that would be better or worse than their current predicament. Back at the junkyard, Rixal was having an epiphany, which was not as glamorous as it sounded. It mostly involved a lot of swearing and an unpleasant crackle of static electricity that made all the hairs on her arm stand on end. Gilly, I think I might have just stumbled onto something big, she said, her voice the kind of calm that usually preceded either a major discovery or a catastrophic failure. Like make the powers that be very nervous big. Should I break out the good whiskey then? More like reinforce the bar. You know how these things go, in a place where broken dreams found new life, where the past whispered secrets no one wanted to hear, and where the present teetered on the edge of something very new and very dangerous. Rixal Baines had found what might just be the tipping point. And somewhere out in the vastness of space, a group of aliens were starting to sweat. The humans, it seemed, were up to something again. Rixal turned the component over in her hands, her mind racing with the possibilities and the risks. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever this thing did, it was going to make waves. Do you ever wonder, she asked, almost to herself, if maybe some doors are better left unopened? Only when I'm sober, Gilly shot back. Then I guess it's a good thing we're both perpetually half in the bag. As the clink of tools and the hum of distant machinery enveloped her, Rixal couldn't help but smile. It was the kind of smile that spoke of adventure and danger, of the known and the unknown, of a future that could go in a million different directions, most of them probably bad. But hell, wasn't that what made life interesting? Rixal Baines had never considered herself much of a scientist. Sure, she tinkered with old tech and made a quick buck selling refurbished antiques to desperate collectors, but this whole new physics thing was a bit out of her league. Still, standing in front of the Toaster FTL hybrid, she felt an odd sense of accomplishment, like she just managed to bake a cake without burning the kitchen down. A rare triumph. "All right, you rust bucket," she muttered, eyeing the anomaly like it was about to sprout legs and do a jig. "Let's see what else you can screw up today." She twisted a dial, and the thing shuddered violently, emitting a low hum that vibrated through the floor. Somewhere deep in its circuitry, sparks danced with the enthusiasm of intoxicated fireflies. Rixal stepped back, instinctively checking her fingers were still fully attached. Just as she was considering whether her next move should involve a fire extinguisher or a stiff drink, her comm buzzed again. Gilly's voice crackled through, sounding like he was broadcasting from the inside of a tin can. "Rix, I just got word from the outer stations. They're experiencing some unusual tech malfunctions." "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "Define unusual, Gilly." "Like machines deciding they're pigeons and taking flight unusual, and cloaking devices turning everything pink unusual." Rixal winced, watching as the anomaly continued its symphony of chaos. "Maybe. It's possible I poked the wrong bear, or toaster." "Toaster bear thing," Gilly groaned, the kind of sound usually reserved for someone who's just been told their house is on fire, but the good news is marshmallows are on sale. "You're not getting paid enough for this. Story of my life. But hey, on the bright side, at least no one's dead yet." That I know of, a few light years away, in the ever-so-serious halls of the Zinc Coalition's command center, things were beginning to unravel faster than a poorly knitted sweater. High Commander Tikal stood before a massive display screen, eyes narrowed as he watched blips of data scroll past, each one flashing an alarming shade of red. "Lieutenant Zerith," Tikal barked, fingers tapping against his armrest with the impatience of a man who'd been waiting in line too long at the DMV. "What's the status on those disturbances?" Zerith, looking more like a deer caught in headlights than ever, straightened his back. "Sir, readings indicate sudden fluctuations in nearby tech systems." "It's as if someone's thrown a wrench into the cosmic works." "Humans," Tikal grumbled under his breath, as if the word alone was an insult. "This has their mark all over it. They're the only species with the gall to break things just to see how they tick." "Shall we send a recon team, sir?" Zerith asked, knowing full well that the answer was probably going to result in a lot of paperwork. "Yes, but with discretion. We don't want them realizing we're watching until we fully understand what sort of calamity they've cooked up this time." Back at Naxos Orbital, Rixal was knee-deep in malfunctioning machinery, surrounded by the mess of parts that had once been a substation regulator. She was trying to remember if she'd ever read a manual that covered when things go sideways due to unintended electromagnetic feedback loops. "Gilly, you still there?" she called, adjusting her earpiece as she reached for a spanner. "Thoughts on how to stop this thing before it starts rewriting reality? Have you tried turning it off and on again?" Gilly's voice was as deadpan as ever, offering the age-old tech support advice. "Very funny, but if it worked, you'd be hearing about a new religion based on the power of the reset button." As the anomaly continued its unwelcome performance, Rixal started to curse the day she decided to poke around in the depths of Naxos. But beneath that kernel of regret was an undeniable itch, the sort that whispered promises of discovery, of changing the rules of the game that had been set in stone for far too long. "All right, Toaster," she muttered, yanking a wire free. "Let's see if we can't get you to calm the hell down." The effect was immediate and stunning in its wrongness. The anomaly's hum crescendoed into a piercing whine, rattling her teeth and threatening to shake the station apart. The lights flickered ominously, casting shadows that danced on the walls like specters at a rave. "Rix, what the hell did you just do?" Gilly yelled, his voice tinged with something that might have been panic or excitement. It was hard to tell. They were often indistinguishable in moments like these. "Not sure. But if you don't hear from me in 5, assume the Toaster won." Across the vastness of space, in the heart of the Zinc Coalition's technological labyrinth, technicians were scrambling to make sense of the sudden influx of errors. Screens blinked erratically, systems flared and faltered, and Tikal's patience wore thinner than oxygen on Mars. "Find the source," he commanded, each word sharp enough to cut glass. "Before the entire sector collapses under this electronic plague." Zerith hovered by his side, hands clasped behind his back in the universal posture of "This is above my pay grade. Sir, preliminary scans indicate it's emanating from an area near Naxos Orbital." "Naxos," Tikal repeated, the name dripping from his lips like a curse. Why is it always Naxos? Because that's where the humans are, sir, Zerith supplied helpfully, a statement so obvious it bordered on insulting. Of course. Alert our nearest fleet. I want this mess contained before it spreads any further. Meanwhile, back in the chaotic heart of Naxos, Rixal was doing her best to not become a permanent part of the wreckage. She tugged another wire, hopeful it would do something productive instead of adding to the chaos. Come on, you stubborn piece of junk, she grunted, coaxing the machine as if it were a particularly recalcitrant horse. Give me something here. The anomaly, perhaps responding to her brand of coaxing, or just to spite her, finally began to stabilize. The lights stopped flickering, and the cacophony of sound dwindled to a dull hum. Well, that's mildly better, Rixal muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. Gilly, you still with me? Barely. You nearly gave me a heart attack, and I'm not even sure I have one. Hey, you and me both. But at least it stopped doing whatever the hell it was doing. For now, famous last words, Gilly quipped. Now can we please figure out what exactly this thing does before it decides to finish what it started? Yeah. I'm on it, Rixal stared at the anomaly, her mind racing with the implications. What had she unleashed? And more importantly, how could she control it? In the Zinc Coalition's command center, Tikal watched as technicians scrambled like ants in a rainstorm, trying to restore systems to their previous glory. The blaring alarms had ceased, but the threat loomed, an uninvited guest lingering in the doorway. Lieutenant Zerith, Tikal said, his voice low and dangerous. Once we have a handle on this, I want a full report. I want to know exactly what those humans have gotten their grubby little fingers into. Yes, sir. But what about the recon team? Deploy them immediately. I want eyes on Naxos. If the humans are cooking up another catastrophe, I want to know before it hits our doorstep. As the command center buzzed with activity, Tikal pondered just how far humanity would push its boundaries, and how much longer they could dance around cosmic forces before everything came crashing down. Back at Naxos, Rixal fiddled with the anomaly, her mind a tempest of questions and half-formed conclusions. Whatever this thing was meant to do, she had a feeling she'd only scratched the surface. And in the harsh universe where tech was king and secrets were currency, she knew she was onto something big, something dangerous. All right, Toaster, she said, her voice a mix of challenge and intrigue. Let's see what other secrets you're hiding, because in a universe where the lines between past and future blurred, where forgotten relics held the keys to the unknown, and where a single discovery could tilt the scales, Rixal Baines was ready to shake things up, one piece of junk at a time. But as she stared into the heart of the anomaly, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that somewhere out there, eyes were on her, watching, waiting, and that the next move might not be hers to make, because in the end, in this grim dance of discovery and danger, in this cosmic game where the stakes were higher than ever, every player had a role, and Rixal was determined to play hers to the hilt. Rixal Baines leaned back in her rickety chair, the kind that had probably been salvaged from a bygone era when comfort was an afterthought, and stared at the mess she'd made of the anomaly. If a sentient piece of toast could look more confused, it would probably look a lot like the Toaster FTL hybrid sprawled out on her workbench. Gilly, I've got a feeling this thing wasn't built for making breakfast, she said, flicking a screwdriver between her fingers like a street magician with a penchant for bad ideas. But it sure as hell could scramble an egg if it wanted to. Yeah, and probably the brains of anyone within a 10-foot radius, Gilly replied, his voice as sardonic as a snake oil salesman who'd just hit the jackpot. You think you can actually get it to do something useful instead of just giving everyone a tan? It's got potential, Rixal admitted, though potential for what, she hadn't quite figured out. Once I decipher its guts, we might have something that'll make the Zinc Coalition choke on their own arrogance. Ah, good. I always love a plan that relies on pissing off intergalactic powers. It's like poking a sleeping bear, except the bear has lasers. Relax. We'll be fine as long as we keep our heads down and pretend we know what we're doing. As if on cue, the comm unit crackled and a new voice joined the fray. It was Tinkerbell, a nickname she'd given the AI, managing Naxos' less than impressive defensive grid. In reality, it was no more magical than a toaster with delusions of grandeur. Alert. Incoming vessel detected. Signature matches Zinc Coalition Reconnaissance Class, the AI, intoned with all the warmth of a broken fridge. Please prepare for potential hostile engagement. Well, shit, Rixal muttered, exchanging a glance with Gilly that spoke volumes. Mostly volumes of emergency protocols she'd never bothered to read. Looks like our little science fair project has attracted some unwanted attention. Guess it's time to roll out the welcome mat, Gilly said, a grin spreading across his face that was all teeth and no comfort. Outside, the junkyard that was Naxos' orbital salvage station began to shimmer with a kind of organized chaos. Scrap shuttles, cobbled together from spare parts and a prayer, buzzed into action. They weren't much to look at, but they were fast, unpredictable, and the only thing standing between the station and an unscheduled visit from the Coalition. Rixal stood up, her mind already racing with possibilities. All right, Gilly, time to see if the Coalition's scouts can handle a little interference. I'll rig up some surprises, Gilly said, his fingers dancing over his own console like a pianist on a caffeine binge. Might be enough to send them running back to their shiny headquarters with their tails between their legs. Yeah, well, let's hope they don't decide to bring more friends to the party. Meanwhile, in the labyrinthine halls of the Zinc Coalition's command center, High Commander Tikal was in the middle of what would charitably be called a bad day. The kind of day where you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, and then the bed explodes for good measure. Report, Tikal demanded, his gaze fixed on a holographic map that glowed with the ethereal light of too many red alerts. Sir, the recon vessel has detected unusual activity around Naxos, Zerith said, looking more harried than usual. They're reporting an increase in electromagnetic disturbances and possible hostile movements. Increase. Of what nature, unknown, sir, but it's significant enough that they're requesting backup, for a bunch of salvage rats. Tikal snorted, the derision in his voice enough to strip paint. Deploy a second vessel. I want answers, not excuses. Back on Naxos, Rixal was already in the thick of it, tweaking the anomaly's settings in hopes of creating something resembling an advantage. The Toaster FTL hybrid sat there, inert but full of potential, like an ancient relic just waiting for the right moment to spring to life. All right, you piece of junk, she murmured, fingers deftly adjusting controls with all the precision of a surgeon operating in a hurricane. Show me what you've got. The anomaly sputtered to life, emitting a low hum that felt more like a growl. It was a beast awakening, its potential untapped, and Rixal couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. This was it. The moment where junkyard ingenuity would either shine or explode spectacularly. Outside, the scrap shuttles had formed a loose perimeter, a ragtag fleet that was as much deterrent as decoy. Their pilots, drawn from the ranks of the desperate and the daring, were ready to give the Coalition a run for their money. Rix, I've got eyes on the recon ship, Gilly reported, his voice crackling through the comm. Looks like they're taking the bait, good. Keep them occupied while I see if I can pull a rabbit out of this toaster. Rabbits are nice. Just make sure it's not a grenade. Rixal grinned, despite the tension thrumming through her veins. Moments like these, where everything could go disastrously wrong or gloriously right, were the reason she'd chosen this life. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, and she wouldn't trade it for all the shiny tech in the universe. The anomaly's hum began to stabilize, and Rixal felt a surge of triumph. Whatever else could be said about her skills, she was still the best damn tech archaeologist in this corner of the galaxy, and if she could harness this thing's power, they might just turn the tables on the Coalition. Gilly, I think I've got it, she said, her voice electric with possibility. This thing, it's a generator, a power source, and it can boost our systems tenfold. Tenfold, huh? Sounds like something we could use right about now, damn right. Let's give those Coalition bastards a taste of their own medicine. And so the battle began in earnest, a chaotic ballet of scrap shuttles and Coalition reconnaissance ships, each jockeying for position in the debris-strewn arena that was Naxos orbital. The Coalition, with their sleek vessels and superior firepower, were accustomed to having the upper hand. But they hadn't counted on the sheer tenacity, or insanity, of a bunch of humans with nothing left to lose. As the anomaly's power surged through the station, systems lit up with newfound vigor. Shields flared to life, weapons charged with a fierceness that belied their cobbled-together nature, and the very fabric of Naxos seemed to pulse with energy. Rix, you magnificent bastard, Gilly whooped, adrenaline infusing his voice with glee. You've done it. They're pulling back, of course they are, Rixal smirked, watching as the Coalition ships retreated, their pilots undoubtedly cursing the day they'd tangled with the likes of her. Never underestimate the power of desperation and a good junkyard, but even as the Coalition ships fell back, Rixal knew the reprieve was temporary. They'd be back with reinforcements, and she had to be ready. Gilly, let's get to work fortifying our defenses. They'll want another go, and next time they'll bring the big guns. On it, boss, he replied, already deep into plans and schematics. This is gonna be fun. In the command center of the Zinc Coalition, High Commander Tikal was not having a good day. His second vessel had returned with its tail metaphorically between its legs, and the report they delivered was less than flattering. Sir, the humans have somehow managed to boost their systems, Zerith said, his tone apologetic. Our recon ships were unable to penetrate their defenses, boosted their systems. Tikal echoed, disbelief coloring his voice. How, we're not sure, sir. But it seems they've harnessed some sort of anomaly, possibly of human creation. Humans, Tikal muttered, more accursed than a word. Send in a task force. I want that anomaly, and I want it yesterday. As the Coalition prepared for another round, Rixal was back in her lab, staring at the anomaly with a mix of trepidation and anticipation. This was just the beginning. She had stumbled upon something incredible, and if she could unlock its secrets, it could change everything. "All right, Toaster," she said, her voice a soft challenge. "What else have you got for me in the unforgiving expanse of space, where alliances shifted like desert sands and power was the ultimate currency?" Rixal Baines was ready to play the game, and she intended to win no matter the cost. Because when push came to shove, and it invariably did, humans were nothing if not adaptable. And in a universe that prized innovation and rebellion in equal measure, they had just the right amount of crazy to make miracles happen. As the station thrummed with the anomaly's energy, Rixal couldn't help but smile. Let the Zinc Coalition come. They'd find more than they bargained for in this corner of the galaxy. And Rixal had every intention of sending them scurrying back to their sleek, sterile halls with stories of a junkyard queen who dared to defy them. One toaster at a time. "Get ready for round 2, Rixal grumbled, staring at the anomaly like it owed her money. The thing vibrated with power, a temperamental dragon waiting to be tamed, or maybe just a toaster on the fritz. The jury was still out on that one. Gilly looked up from his schematic doodling, a pencil tucked behind one ear like some ancient scholar of mayhem. "Think we'll survive it, always the optimist, Gilly. You should start a motivational podcast," he snorted, focusing back on his work. "Step 1, don't die. Step 2, if you die, don't do it on my watch." "That about it, perfect," Rixal replied, her fingers dancing over the controls, flicking switches like a demented DJ. "Guess we can kiss our break goodbye." Outside the station was a hive of activity, scrappers moving with purpose. If you squinted, it almost looked like a proper military operation. Almost, but this was no parade. This was survival with a side of lunacy. As for the Zinc Coalition, they decided to double down on aggression. High Commander Tikal wasn't about to let a bunch of upstart humans make him look like an idiot in front of the coalition board. They were already calling him Commander Toast behind his back, and he didn't need another nickname to add to the collection. "Deploy the task force," he barked, each word a dagger aimed at whoever had the misfortune of listening. That would be Zerith, who had perfected the art of looking attentive while mentally composing resignation letters. "Task force deploying, sir. They should reach Naxos in 2 hours. Good. I expect results this time." As the coalition ships powered up and prepared to jump to hyperspace, Rixal was staunchly ignoring the mounting disaster brewing outside. One crisis at a time, she thought, staring down the anomaly. "Got a plan yet?" Gilly asked, stretching like a cat who'd found the only sunny spot in a snowstorm. "Working on it," Rixal replied, twiddling a wire with the dexterity of a magician's assistant. "This thing might have a flaw, something we can exploit, a flaw in advanced alien tech." The very idea, Gilly mocked, eyes twinkling with mirth. "What is it, made in Naxos or something?" "Funny," Rixal deadpanned. "Seriously though, I think it's got a frequency sync issue. If we can tap into that, we might be able to overload it. Turn their tech against them." "Sweet irony," Gilly said, a grin stretching across his face. "Use their fancy toys to make them cry like babies." "It's a plan," Rixal shrugged. "A risky one, but still a plan." The comm crackled to life as if it had suddenly remembered its role in all this chaos. Tinkerbell's voice was as cheerful as a tax audit. "Incoming Zinc vessels detected. Estimated time to arrival, 45 minutes. "Well, that's just great," Rixal muttered, doing quick mental math. "Time to see if this thing can do more than toast our enemies." Outside, the scrap fleet buzzed into position, a swarm of angry wasps ready to sting. They might not have the polish of coalition ships, but they had grit and desperation, 2 ingredients for a potent cocktail of chaos. "Let's get to it, Gilly," Rixal said, her voice steely. "We've got a toaster to exploit and a coalition to annoy. On your lead, Rix. Let's show them what human ingenuity looks like when it's pissed off." In the relentless vacuum of space, the Zinc task force emerged from hyperspace with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Sleek ships glided into formation, their hulls gleaming with the cold promise of violence. Tikal's orders were simple: dismantle the humans and recover the anomaly. Easy enough on paper, but paper didn't have to deal with angry humans. "Engage," came the order, transmitted across the fleet. Coalition ships surged forward, weapons primed to make quick work of the Naxos defenses. Except there wasn't anything quick about it. "We've got incoming," Gilly shouted, his voice tinged with excitement and just the barest whiff of terror. "Hold them off," Rixal barked, fingers ablur over her console. "I'm almost there," the anomaly whirred ominously, emitting a low hum that resonated through the station. It felt like being in a giant speaker dialed to max volume, each vibration a promise of obliteration or salvation. Scrap shuttles darted around coalition vessels like gnats, small but infuriatingly difficult to swat. The humans fought with reckless abandon, every move a dice roll with death, and the coalition found themselves embroiled in a dance they hadn't planned for. "Rix, this better work," Gilly said, glancing over with an expression that spoke volumes, mostly about fireballs and the desire to avoid them. "It will," Rixal assured him, though her heart thudded like a drumbeat at a funeral. Or we'll have a lovely light show to go out with. The moment stretched into eternity, a breath held across the battlefield. Then, with a final adjustment that felt like both an ending and a beginning, Rixal connected the anomaly circuits. Now, she yelled, hitting the switch with a fervor that bordered on religious zeal. The effect was immediate. A surge of energy rippled through the station, radiating outward with a force that bent reality around its edges. Coalition systems faltered, their sleek exteriors shimmering with static as the anomaly's pulse disrupted their carefully calibrated tech. "Whoa," Gilly yelled, clinging to his console as the station shuddered. "Did you just hack their ships? More like I gave them a really bad case of indigestion," Rixal replied, her grin wide and wild. "Their systems are shorting. They can't compensate for the frequency interference." Coalition ships veered off course, sensors scrambling to make sense of the chaos. It was like watching a flock of birds suddenly forget how to fly, a ballet of confusion that would have been hilarious if not for the stakes. In the command center, Tikal watched the debacle unfold with a mix of disbelief and fury. His carefully orchestrated assault was unraveling at the seams, and all because of a toaster with extra ambition. "Report," he barked, hands gripping the console like it was the neck of his most incompetent officer. "Sir, we're experiencing widespread systems failure," Zerith said, barely keeping the panic from his voice. "The humans have somehow turned our tech against us." Tikal's response was a litany of curses that would have made a sailor blush. "Pull back, regroup. I want every available expert on this." Now back on Naxos, Rixal and Gilly watched the coalition forces retreat, their victory tinged with disbelief. They'd done it. Somehow, against all odds, they'd turned a kitchen appliance into a weapon of mass confusion. "Never thought I'd see the day," Gilly said, leaning back in his chair with a sigh of relief. "We just sent the coalition packing with a toaster." "Yeah," Rixal agreed, her voice soft with a mix of exhaustion and pride. "But they'll be back, and next time they won't just bring scouts. Guess we'd better get ready then, yeah. But for now, let's enjoy pissing off a galactic power with kitchen tech." As the station settled into an uneasy calm, Rixal couldn't help but marvel at the strange twist of fate that had brought them here. A junkyard on the edge of the galaxy, a toaster-turned anomaly, and a ragtag group of scrappers who refused to back down. "Here's to us," she murmured, raising an imaginary glass. "The lunatics who made it work," Gilly chuckled, clinking his own invisible drink. "Long live the junkyard queens and kings." In the aftermath of victory, as the stars blinked indifferently above, Rixal and Gilly stood as champions of their own unlikely saga. They'd proven that even the most unassuming tech could tip the scales of fate, at least for a while. But Rixal knew the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. And if the coalition thought a setback would deter them, they were in for a rude awakening. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning adversity into opportunity. And with a toaster in hand, Rixal Baines was about to rewrite the rules of the game. With a wry smile and a heart full of defiance, she turned back to her work, ready to prepare for whatever came next. After all, in a universe that thrived on chaos, there was no such thing as too crazy, and Naxos was just getting started. The aftermath of the battle left Naxos' orbital salvage station in an eerie silence. Sure, the hum of the anomaly still resonated with the subtlety of a bad hangover, but the absence of immediate threats made the quiet feel like a mockery more than a reprieve. Rixal stood over her console, the flickering lights reflecting off her eyes like tiny galaxies of frustration. "Well, isn't this a picture of success?" she muttered, flipping a dead switch back and forth more out of spite than hope. "We toasted their systems, and look at us now, living in bliss. Or, impending doom." Gilly, leaning against a bulkhead with the ease of someone without a care in the world, gave her a lazy grin. "Hey, at least we proved we could do it. Nothing like making a galactic power look stupid to put a spring in your step." Rixal shot him a look. "Gilly, they'll be back with more than just a fleet of confused pigeons. They're probably coming armed with a tech expert and a grudge the size of a small moon. How long do you think we've got before they decide toaster time is over?" 10 hours, Gilly replied, inspecting his nails with exaggerated nonchalance. "Give or take a few minutes for lunch breaks and potty stops." The comm unit crackled, announcing its presence like an unwelcome guest at a funeral. Tinkerbell's synthetic voice, still somehow managing to sound judgmental, cut in. "Incoming communication from Zinc Coalition, attempting to intercept." "Ah, our favorite pen pals," Rixal sighed, gesturing for Gilly to patch it through. "Let's hear what the warmongers have to say." The screen flickered to life, revealing the grim visage of High Commander Tikal. He looked like someone who'd just realized his luxury spaceship had been replaced by a tricycle. "Humans," he began, his voice dripping with the contempt of someone who'd found a cockroach in their cereal. "You have made a grave mistake." Rixal, never one to shy away from sarcasm, raised an eyebrow. Sorry, was the mistake using a toaster against your warships, or is it just existing in general? Tikal's eye twitched, a testament to his self-control or lack thereof. You have disrupted the Coalition's operations. This will not go unanswered. We have deployed countermeasures to neutralize your interference permanently. Countermeasures, huh? Sounds like you've been reading too many action novels, Gilly quipped, still leaning lazily against the wall. Enjoy your bravado while it lasts, human, Tikal snapped, his temper fraying like cheap rope. You will soon find your confidence as empty as the void of space. With that ominous farewell, the screen went dark, leaving a silence that felt heavier than a black hole's diet plan. Rixal and Gilly exchanged a glance, the humor in the room evaporating quicker than a smile at a tax audit. Well, Rixal said finally, rubbing the back of her neck like she was trying to erase a particularly problematic thought. Looks like things are about to get interesting. Gilly shrugged, the eternal optimist or possibly just eternally numb. Maybe we're overthinking it. I mean, how bad can it be? As if on cue the station shuddered, lights flickering with the enthusiasm of a dying firefly. The console lit up with alerts, each beep a reminder that sometimes being right was seriously overrated. Figures, Rixal grumbled, lunging for the controls. They're jamming our systems. Gilly, get down to engineering. We need power stable or we're going to be toast. Great, now we're using toaster jokes on ourselves, Gilly muttered, heading for the exit. I'll make sure the engines don't decide they're ghosts of Christmas past. Rixal watched him go, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her gut that was doing a stellar job of impersonating the Titanic. There had to be a way out of this mess, some angle she hadn't considered yet. But thinking was hard when your brain kept reminding you about the army of angry aliens heading your way with gifts of annihilation. She turned her attention back to the anomaly, its steady hum a reminder that their greatest asset was also their biggest liability. If the Coalition had really figured out how to counteract their frequency trick, they'd be up Naxos Creek without a paddle. Or a boat. The comm unit crackled again, Tinkerbell's voice cutting through the static. Rixal, analysis of incoming transmission indicates deployment of advanced dampening fields, high probability of rendering anomaly ineffective. Of course, Rixal sighed, closing her eyes for a moment to curse the universe and its cruel sense of humor. I guess we should have expected them to bring their A game. Or at least their B- game. Probability of survival decreases by 73% if countermeasures are not neutralized. Tinkerbell chirped, as helpful as a fire alarm in a rainstorm. Thanks for the pep talk, Tinkerbell, Rixal said, not bothering to mask the sarcasm. She slapped the console in frustration, the hollow thud echoing her mood. We need a new plan. Fast as she paced the cramped control room, her mind raced through possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. They couldn't rely on the anomaly alone anymore, not with the Coalition ready to pull the plug like a vengeful babysitter. There had to be another way, a twist they hadn't seen yet. Gilly returned, breathless but grinning like a maniac. Good news, bad news time, he announced, leaning against the doorframe. Hit me, Rixal replied, bracing for impact. Power's stable for now, but the bad news is I think one of the cooling ducts is trying to reenact Pompeii. Well, that's reassuring, Rixal muttered, rubbing her temples. Anything else? Maybe the janitor's closet is hosting a rave too? Gilly shrugged. Could be. I didn't check, but hey, I did find an old manual for the FTL drives. Some of the pages are even still readable. Good old-fashioned paper, Rixal mused, the absurdity of the situation almost amusing. Who knew it had come in handy when everything else is falling apart? Together, they pored over the crumbling manual, searching for something, anything, that could give them an edge. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with the kind of jargon that would make an engineer's heart sing and a layman's head explode. But buried among the technical diagrams and cautionary notes was a section that caught Rixal's eye. Wait, she said, tracing a finger over the page. Gilly, look at this. There's a section about resonance fields. If we can create a feedback loop using the anomaly's frequency, it might just amplify the dampening fields right back at them, Gilly finished, catching on quickly, like holding up a mirror to blind someone with their own flashlight. Exactly. Rixal's mind was racing now, the pieces falling into place with a satisfying click. It's risky, but if we can pull it off, we might just survive this mess. Gilly chuckled, the sound more manic than mirthful. And here I thought our biggest problem was running out of coffee. Focus, Gilly, Rixal snapped, though her tone was more exasperated than angry. If we're going to do this, we need to move fast. And pray we're not about to fry ourselves in the process. Step 1, don't die, Gilly reminded her, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Step 2, if you die, don't do it on my watch. Their shared laughter cut through the tension like a knife, a brief moment of levity in the grim reality of their situation. But the stakes were higher than they'd ever been, and failure wasn't just an option, it was practically knocking on their door. With renewed determination, Rixal set to work, her fingers dancing over the console with the grace of a seasoned pianist. Gilly joined her, the two of them working in tandem, their focus unyielding amidst the chaos swirling around them. Outside the station, the vast expanse of space seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next act in this improbable drama. The coalition was drawing nearer with every passing moment, their intentions clear and their resolve unshakable. But Rixal and Gilly refused to go down without a fight. Armed with nothing more than a toaster, a prayer, and a half-baked plan, they prepared to face the oncoming storm with the kind of reckless courage that only humans could muster. Because in the end, it wasn't about the tech, the anomaly, or even the coalition's threat. It was about proving that even the smallest spark of defiance could light up the darkest night, and if they were going out, they'd go out with a bang, not a whimper. As the countdown ticked ever closer to zero, Rixal took a deep breath, her heart pounding like a war drum. "Ready, Gilly?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. He nodded, his grin as bright as a supernova. "Let's give them a show they won't forget." With a final, decisive motion, Rixal activated the feedback loop, sending a surge of energy racing through the systems. The station vibrated with a power that felt almost alive, the anomaly's hum rising to a crescendo that shook them to their very cores. In that moment, as the universe seemed to teeter on the brink, Rixal realized that win or lose, they'd already achieved the impossible. They'd stood against the impossible, and for that, they'd earned their place among the stars. And if the coalition wanted a fight, well, they'd just have to bring it, because Rixal Baines and her ragtag crew were ready for anything, even if it meant rewriting the rules with nothing but a toaster and a dream. The Naxos Orbital Salvage Station was an impressive testament to the galaxy's dedication to glorified junkyards, a haven for every tech archaeologist, or just plain junk rat, who could scrape together a living in the shadow of the Zinc Coalition's looming presence. Now, it was on the verge of becoming a cosmic punching bag, with Rixal Baines and her merry band of misfits in the bullseye. Rixal stood over her console like a captain surveying a sinking ship, her mind a whirlpool of half-baked ideas and caffeine-induced clarity. If she was going down, it wouldn't be without a fight, and certainly not without making the coalition regret underestimating the power of toaster-based technology. Her fingers danced across the console, sifting through data streams like a prospector in a digital gold rush until she found it, an anomaly buried within the anomaly, a feedback loop that could, theoretically, turn the coalition's own countermeasures into their undoing, the astrophysics equivalent of flipping a bird at certain doom. "You ever wonder," she mused aloud, "how the universe manages to screw us over at just the right moment, like it's got a personal vendetta?" Gilly, returning with what might have been the last pot of coffee in the sector, shrugged. "Universe is probably just bored. We're its favorite soap opera, and it can't wait to see how we bungle the next plot twist." "Well," Rixal said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of desperation and determination, "I think I've found the plot twist they won't see coming." Gilly raised an eyebrow, the universal signal for "you've got my attention, and possibly my skepticism." "Here's the deal," Rixal continued, sketching out her plan in broad strokes. "We use the anomaly's frequency to create a resonance field, a feedback loop that shoves their dampening fields right back at them, like turning their own tech into a boomerang." Gilly's grin was as sharp as the edge of a broken promise. "So we're giving them a taste of their own medicine. I like it, risky as hell though. If we miscalculate, we'll end up frying ourselves before they get the chance. What's life without a little risk?" Rixal retorted, her voice a cocktail of hope and sarcasm. "Besides, it's not like we've got a better option. Unless you fancy trying to negotiate our way out with a particularly compelling batch of cookies. If only the universe ran on baked goods," Gilly sighed, remaining an immovable optimist in the face of ruin. "All right, let's do this. But if we survive, you're buying drinks." They worked in tandem, Rixal directing the flow of energy through the station's systems, while Gilly monitored the status of the anomaly. The challenge was not just technical but philosophical, an exercise in turning desperation into innovation. If they pulled this off, they'd have a story to tell that'd keep them in drinks for the rest of their lives, however short that might be. "How we looking, Tinkerbell?" Rixal called over her shoulder, hoping the jaded AI hadn't decided to take up knitting or some equally distracting hobby. "Analysis indicates a 49% probability of successful implementation," Tinkerbell replied, about as comforting as a cobra in a pillowcase. "However, there remains a 51% chance of catastrophic failure. Nothing like beating the odds, right?" Rixal muttered, her voice a mix of bravado and resignation. Gilly chuckled darkly, the kind of laugh that bubbles up when the only other option is to scream. "A real coin toss, this one. But then again, we've always been gamblers at heart." Together, they initiated the sequence, the station shuddering under the strain as the anomaly powered up, its hum escalating from a whisper to a roar. Rixal watched the console, her heart pounding a staccato rhythm against her ribs. Every second felt like a lifetime, stretched taut by the tension of impending doom. Outside, the coalition ships loomed like vultures, their dampening fields ready to snuff out the anomaly's flame. But Rixal and Gilly had one last trick up their sleeves, a trick they hoped would send the vultures scattering. "Ready to flip the switch?" Gilly asked, his hands poised over the controls like a pianist preparing for a symphony of destruction. "Always," Rixal replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's give them a show they won't forget." With a nod, Gilly initiated the feedback loop, sending a surge of energy cascading through the systems. The station seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation and more than a little bit of fear. The feedback loop spiraled outward, a tidal wave of resonance that collided with the coalition's dampening fields. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, time itself caught in the crosshairs of expectation. Then the coalition ships flickered, their systems stuttering as the feedback loop took hold, turning their own tech against them. It was a beautiful irony, the kind that made Rixal want to laugh and cry in equal measure. Tinkerbell's voice crackled through the speakers, a note of surprise coloring its usually sardonic tone. Feedback loop successful, coalition systems destabilized. A cheer erupted from Gilly, the sound wild and unrestrained. Rixal couldn't help but join in, her laughter mingling with his in a symphony of relief and disbelief. They'd done it against all odds, they'd managed to turn the tables. But the victory was bittersweet, a fleeting moment in the grand tapestry of their struggle. The coalition was already regrouping, their ships adjusting to the new threat with ruthless efficiency. "Well," Rixal said, wiping a hand across her brow, "that bought us some time." "But they're not going to take this lying down." Gilly nodded, his expression sobering as he surveyed the console. "True, but it's a start, and sometimes that's all you need. A crack in the door, a sliver of light, enough to push through." Rixal couldn't argue with that. Human resilience was a stubborn thing, refusing to be snuffed out even when the universe seemed determined to squash it flat. And as long as they had that spark, they had a fighting chance. "All right, let's regroup," she said, her mind already racing to the next step. "Tinkerbell, keep an eye on their systems. If they figure out a countermeasure, I want to know about it yesterday." "Understood," Tinkerbell replied, its voice a touch warmer than before. Perhaps even AI could appreciate the thrill of a successful gamble. Gilly stretched, his grin returning as he leaned back in his chair. "You know, I think I might actually miss this place if we manage to make it out alive. There's something about the smell of desperation and burnt circuits that just screams home." Rixal chuckled, the sound weary but genuine. "Who knows, maybe we'll get to come back and turn this into the galaxy's premier tourist attraction." Come see where two idiots nearly took on an intergalactic coalition with nothing but a toaster and a lot of nerve. They shared a moment of quiet camaraderie, the kind that only came from standing shoulder to shoulder against the odds. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together, armed with their wits, their laughter, and a healthy dose of gallows humor. The universe might have been watching, waiting for its next chance to throw a wrench in their plans, but Rixal and Gilly weren't backing down. Not now, not ever. They had a job to do, and they were damn well going to see it through to the bitter, brilliant end. "Back to work," Rixal said finally, her voice a mix of determination and wry amusement. "We've got a coalition to piss off and a universe to defy." Gilly saluted, his grin a flash of defiance. "And if we happen to save the day while we're at it, well, that's just a bonus." With that, they turned their attention back to the console, ready to face whatever the galaxy threw their way, because in the end, it wasn't about the technology or the odds. It was about standing up, staring into the void, and daring it to blink first. And as long as they had each other, a toaster and a dream, they were invincible, or at least they'd die trying, and that was a promise they intended to keep. Gilly's fingers danced over the console like a virtuoso tickling the ivories, though the symphony he was playing could end with a lot more than just a polite round of applause. The coalition ships, once a terrifying presence, now jittered in space like they'd been caught with their pants down. Systems flickered, lights blinked in confusion, and somewhere on a very distant bridge, an alien was probably having a nervous breakdown. "Look at him squirm," Gilly said, his grin almost ear to ear. "Never thought I'd see the day when a toaster could bring a fleet to its knees." Rixal leaned back, crossing her arms with a smirk that could slice through hull plating. "Tinkerbell, status report. Coalition ships have experienced significant system failures." Tinkerbell's voice crackled through the comm. "Structural integrity compromised. Suggest initiating celebratory dance." Rixal rolled her eyes. "I think I'll skip the jig." "Got more pressing matters, like not dying in a blaze of glory. Where's your sense of adventure?" Gilly quipped. "We could go down in intergalactic history. The Battle of Naxos Station, Rixal and Gilly versus the alien armada. Has a nice ring, doesn't it? With our luck, they'll just call it two idiots and a kitchen appliance," Rixal replied, a wry tilt to her lips. But speaking of history, how's our makeshift boomerang holding up? Gilly tapped a few keys, pulling up a schematic that made more sense to him than it did to anyone without a death wish. Anomaly's stable for now, but we've got to keep an eye on it. One wrong move and we'll be the ones doing the electric boogaloo, noted Rixall said, her gaze shifting to the viewport. The coalition ships were still there, but they weren't moving with their usual lethal grace. It was as if their choreography had been ruined by a very unwelcome disco ball. If she was lucky, High Commander Tikal was having a spectacularly bad day. As if conjured by her thoughts, Tinkerbell's voice broke the silence. Incoming transmission from High Commander Tikal. Oh, this should be rich, Rixall muttered, gesturing for Gilly to bring it up on the screen. The visage of High Commander Tikal appeared, looking every bit the grim reaper of alien bureaucracy. Rixall Baines, Tikal began, his voice dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for stepping in something unpleasant. Your antics have grown tiresome. Antics, Gilly echoed, feigning shock. Why, we're just humble entertainers, bringing a little flair to your mundane existence. Tikal's expression could have curdled milk in another galaxy. Your defiance will not go unpunished. The Zinc Coalition will not be humiliated by primitives. Rixall leaned forward, a dangerous glint in her eye. Funny, from here it looks like you're the ones having performance issues. Maybe you should try turning it off and on again. There was a beat of silence, Tikal's face the picture of impotent fury. Rixall could almost see the gears grinding in his head, trying to spin this disaster into something resembling control. Make no mistake, he said finally, each word a jagged shard of ice. We will recover from this setback. You will be nothing more than a footnote in our conquest. Rixall waved dismissively. Promises, promises. You know, for Galactic Coalition, you guys sure do get rattled easily. Maybe pick on someone your own size next time. The screen went dark and Gilly let out a low whistle. Think we made a friend, more like a nemesis, Rixall replied, the adrenaline still singing in her veins. And a very pissed-off one at that. Well, at least we know we've got their attention. Nothing like a bit of fireworks to announce your presence. Gilly stretched, cracking his knuckles with satisfaction. But seriously, what's next? Rixall echoed, turning back to the console with newfound determination. We keep up the pressure. Tinkerbell, keep monitoring their systems. If they try to reboot, I want to know. Affirmative, Tinkerbell replied, its voice carrying a hint of smug pride. Coalition activity remains largely disorganized. Rixall nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. They'd bought themselves a reprieve, but the Coalition wasn't known for licking its wounds quietly. They'd come back, likely with a vengeance and a whole lot of grudges. Think they'll roll over and give us a parade? Gilly asked, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Not unless they plan to mow us down with it, Rixall shot back, but they're on their heels. We've got a chance to push them further. Always the optimist, Gilly said, his grin a flash of white teeth. All right, Captain. What's the plan? Rixall's fingers flew over the console, her thoughts crystallizing into a strategy as she spoke. We keep them guessing, harass their systems, disrupt their comms. If they can't coordinate, they can't fight effectively. Sounds like my kind of mischief, Gilly said, his fingers itching for action. You sure you're not an evil genius in disguise? Nah, Rixall replied, her eyes flicking up to meet his. Just a regular genius. But I'll take the compliment. Together, they set to work, a well-oiled machine of chaos and ingenuity. Gilly flooded the Coalition's channels with interference, turning their orderly commands into a cacophony of static and garbled nonsense. Rixall tweaked the anomaly settings, sending out pulses that danced along the edge of the Coalition's defenses like a particularly annoying mosquito. As they worked, a small part of her marveled at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, two scrap rats on a salvage station, taking on a force that could probably blow them out of existence with a sneeze. And yet, against all odds, they were holding their own. Think Tikal's having a meltdown yet? Gilly asked, his tone light but his focus unwavering. If he isn't, he's got the patience of a saint, Rixall replied, not missing a beat. But I'd bet he's tearing strips off someone right now. Probably Zerith, poor bastard, Gilly said, shaking his head. Hope he's got a good resume ready, should list excellent scapegoat as a skill, Rixall quipped. Might come in handy. The eyes stretched on, a blur of activity and adrenaline. They were a two-person wrecking crew, keeping the Coalition on its toes with a blend of skill and good old-fashioned bravado. And though they were outgunned, outnumbered, and in way over their heads, they were still standing, which in a universe as unforgiving as theirs counted as a win. Eventually, the Coalition ships began to withdraw, their retreat a grudging admission of defeat. Tikal might not have liked it, but with systems malfunctioning and a station full of humans who refused to die quietly, it wasn't as if he had much choice. They're pulling back, Tinkerbell announced, a note of triumph in its usually sardonic tone. Retreat protocols initiated. Rixall leaned back, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Well, I'll be damned, victory dance time, Gilly asked, a hopeful lilt to his words. Maybe later, Rixal replied, a weary smile tugging at her lips. But for now, let's just savor the moment. They watched as the coalition ships vanished into the void, their retreat a ripple in the fabric of space. It wasn't a total victory, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to remind them that even the little guys could take a swing at the giants. Guess we're not footnotes after all, Gilly said, his voice warm with satisfaction. Nope, Rixal agreed, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her. More like the bold print, and with any luck, we'll stay that way. Gilly clapped a hand on her shoulder, his grin wide and genuine. We make a hell of a team, don't we? Yeah, Rixal said softly, thinking of all they'd overcome and all that still lay ahead. We really do. As the station hummed around them, its systems settling into a hard-earned calm, Rixal allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. They'd done the impossible, turned the tables on a force that should have crushed them, and with any luck, it was just the beginning. All right, she said, shaking off the fatigue as she pushed herself upright. Let's get this place sorted. Plenty of work still to do. Right behind you, Captain Gilly said, a spring in his step as he followed her lead. Together, they turned their attention back to the console, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way next, because in the end, it wasn't about beating the odds or defying expectations. It was about carving out a space, however small, where they could be themselves, bold, irreverent, and unyielding. And as long as they had each other, a trusty toaster, and a shared dream of survival, they were unstoppable. At least until the universe came up with its next plot twist, and knowing their luck, it was bound to be a doozy. But for now, they had a moment, and sometimes that was all you needed. The dust was settling, literally and metaphorically. Naxos Orbital Salvage Station, once a haven for the galaxy's most determined tech archaeologists, or as their mothers probably called them, disappointments, was buzzing with a newfound sense of purpose. It was as if the place had undergone a personality transplant from graveyard to tech playground. Naxos was alive, and not just because someone had finally fixed the coffee machine. Rixal Baines stood amidst the chaos, watching as humans, those irreverent, stubborn creatures, transformed what was once a giant metal carcass into something resembling hope. Not the pretentious, shiny kind of hope the Zinc Coalition peddled with their propaganda, but the scrappy, underdog kind. The kind that said, screw you, universe, we're still here. Gilly was perched on a pile of semi-reliable circuit boards, surveying the organized chaos. What do you reckon? Scrap heap of dreams or the galaxy's biggest fire hazard? Little column A, little column B, Rixal replied, arms crossed, her expression hovering between pride and disbelief. But hey, we can always just blow it up if we get bored. Right, because that worked out so well the last time, Gilly said, his grin wide and unapologetic. But seriously, what do you think T-Call's up to? Hiding under his desk, weeping into his bureaucratic robes. If there's any justice in this universe, yeah, Rixal said, though she knew better. The Zinc Coalition wouldn't just roll over because of one humiliating defeat, but for now, they'd retreated, licking their wounds and nursing grudges bigger than their egos. Rixal watched as a group of humans attempted to install what had once been a coalition data core into the station's primary systems. She winced as sparks flew. Some habits died harder than others. You think we've got a shot at making this work? She asked, nodding towards the makeshift team of engineers. Gilly shrugged. Depends. If by work you mean not explode immediately, then sure, I'm optimistic. High praise indeed, Rixal said dryly. But seriously, look at them. A few months ago, they were just trying to scavenge enough to get by. Now they're building, whatever this is, an abomination most likely, Gilly said, but there was a note of admiration in his voice. But you know our abomination. Yeah, Rixal agreed, a smile creeping onto her face. The coalition wanted to snuff us out, and instead they've lit a fire under our collective ass. Meanwhile, Tinkerbell, the ever-present AI, chimed in. Coalition activity continues to be minimal. Surveillance suggests they are regrouping. Estimated time of retaliation. Indeterminate. That's your code for we're screwed, isn't it? Gilly said, casting a suspicious glance at the console. Indeterminate, Tinkerbell repeated, its tone bordering on the offensive side of blasé. Rixal rolled her eyes. See, people think AI is all-knowing and benevolent. Meanwhile, we get stuck with one that has the emotional range of a teaspoon. Hey, it's gotten us this far, Gilly said, giving the console a pat as if it were a loyal dog, albeit one with a penchant for sarcasm and dry humor. But what's the endgame here, Rixal? We've poked the bear, so what happens when it wakes up? Rixal considered this, leaning against the nearest stable surface, a rarity on Naxos. We keep adapting. They're not the only ones who can innovate. We've got a whole galaxy of junk to explore, and if we're smart about it, we can rebuild faster than they can tear us down. Spoken like someone with a death wish, Gilly replied, though his eyes sparkled with that peculiar human trait, hope. But then again, wouldn't be the first time. From the other side of the station, a shout went up as one of the engineers managed to get a salvaged drone to fly. It wobbled through the air, its movements erratic, but it didn't crash, yet. A cheer erupted, and for a moment it seemed like anything might be possible. See, Rixal nodded toward the makeshift drone. Proof that chaos can be creative, or just really lucky, Gilly countered, though he couldn't help but smile. So, Captain, what's next? We keep poking the bear until it gets tired and hibernates, something like that, Rixal said. She turned her gaze to the vast expanse of space stretching out beyond the viewport. It was daunting, sure, but it was also full of possibilities. We keep moving, keep learning. Turn their own tech against them if we have to. The universe might want us dead, but it's gonna have to try a hell of a lot harder. Good thing too, Gilly said, rubbing his hands together with glee. I was getting bored. Nothing like a bit of intergalactic brinkmanship to spice things up, spoken like a man who hasn't had a vacation in years, Rixal noted, raising an eyebrow. Spoken like a man who doesn't know the meaning of vacation, Gilly corrected. Besides, who needs a beach when you've got adventure? Rixal chuckled, feeling the weight of the universe lift, if only slightly. It wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was a start, and for now that was enough. As they surveyed the bustling scene around them, Rixal couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. The universe was a mess of contradictions and chaos, but maybe that was the only way it worked, by breaking down and building back up again, over and over. Humans had a knack for thriving in adversity. It wasn't always pretty, but it was real. And who knows, Rixal added, her eyes scanning the horizon. Maybe one day they'll look back on all this and call it the dawn of a new age. Or maybe they'll just call it a damn good story, Gilly smirked. Either way, I'm in. So long as there's glory, guts, and maybe a little bit of revenge. Spoken like a true human, Rixal said, clapping him on the back. Now let's get to work. Destiny waits for no one. Especially for us. As they turned back to the chaos of the salvage station, ready to face whatever came next, Rixal knew one thing for sure. Whatever the universe threw at them, they'd handle it, together, one misstep at a time. In the heart of Naxos, the scrappy band of misfits gave the cosmos a run for its money, and somewhere out there, High Commander Tikal was probably nursing a very sore ego. But here on a station that should have been a footnote, humanity was carving out its own story, and if the universe thought it could stop them, it had another thing coming. Hey Gilly, Rixal said, a thought striking her as they moved back into action. Yeah, think we should get ourselves a new mascot. Maybe something that screams rebellion and we don't know what we're doing, a toaster with a cape, Gilly suggested. Perfect, Rixal replied, her grin as wide as the galaxy. Absolutely perfect.